Hello and welcome to the Bankers Masterclass series in association with Banking Circle on the future of digital financial infrastructure. I'm James King, the Bankers Europe editor, and I'm joined by Anders Lacour, Chief Executive of Banking Circle. In the first chapter of this four-part series, we will explore the extent to which incumbent banks have made progress on their path to digital readiness. Anders, Banking Circle has recently published some research around the digitalisation plans of incumbent banks and the extent to which they have been impacted by COVID-19. But prior to the current health crisis, just how much progress had these banks made in terms of their digital agenda?
I think what's just happened in any industry, in any business during COVID was that digitization was just accelerated. With a pace that people hadn't expected. So I think if you look into the agenda, then I think digitization has been on the forefront of the agenda of banks for many years. I think what will happen now is that COVID will probably accelerate also, you could say, the implementation and execution of that digital agenda.
So Anders, have banks been able to move quickly to adapt to this changing digital model, given the fact that so many are built on legacy systems?
It's a good question. I actually think what we saw in the market like 6-7 years ago was that a lot of banks wanted to do everything themselves. And we've seen a very big change in mindset. That change in mindset was pre-COVID, where a lot of banks, I think, realized that they were going to do what they were best at in their domestic core area. Again, having a digital first agenda, while then using third-party providers to handle tasks that were, you say, non-core for them, whether this was payments outside of their domestic core or other stuff. And I think in that aspect, we saw NatWest launch their own digital bank. We've seen JP Morgan as one of the other incumbents also moving into launching a separate digital bank. And I think many or almost all of the banks are aware of that. And actually, in my opinion, curbing with it in quite a good way. We can also see from the research that we have done that 80% of retail banks and 74% of commercial banks have already worked with third-party providers. And close to 90% of all banks are working with, you could say, customer data to look at changing demands. You could basically say that the term KYC is getting broader. Know your clients is not just about the regulatory aspect, but also about the business aspect. So in all aspects of this, yes, I think the existing incumbent banks are actually curbing well with it, given the technology legacy most of them have.
And finally, Anders, one of the really interesting points stemming from your research is around this idea of confidence among commercial and retail banks about their ability to weather both existing and future challenges. Do you think that confidence is justified?
Again, it's a very good question. I think if you look into the research we did, we can see that 1/3 of financial institutions are still concerned about the pace of technological changes in the financial industry, while only 1 in 6 commercial banks actually see this as a major concern. We could also see that during COVID, the numbers of people changing their bank account dropped to the lowest point seen for a very, very long time. And I think some of the confidence you can see in the existing incumbents in the financial industry, and especially within banks when you look at the future, is that they typically have brands, they have balance sheet, and when the storm is weathering, you typically as a client want to bank with what you know works. So I think yes, to some extent it can be justified, and I think if you look, I'm quite optimistic on behalf of the existing incumbent banks, but that's more because I believe they will be able to do the digital first agenda over the next decade by literally doing that and then letting other businesses do what's not core for them.
Thank you, Anders. And in chapter 2, we will discuss the idea of the future-proof bank.